Alright, so as I mentioned previously, a Python library, or sometimes called a Python package, is basically a bundle of features that extend the existing functionality of the Python programming language. And when we installed the Anaconda distribution, it took care of about 100 different libraries for us. It installed those all on our local system. Now, those libraries are not imported by default into our Jupyter Notebook, and the reason for this is pretty obvious. It's to save memory. If we were loading all of those 100 libraries and all their functionalities, even though we didn't have to use all of them, well, then the Jupyter Notebook would be under a lot more stress. So we really only want to import the ones that we want to use, and that operation has to be repeated at the start of every Jupyter Notebook. So the process is fairly simple. You just have to remember to do it whenever you open a brand new Jupyter Notebook. And I will certainly take the time throughout this course and throughout each module to remind you to execute this code. If you don't import a library such as pandas, well, predictably, all of the pandas related functionality will simply not work. So usually, even if you forget it, there's going to be an error very quickly, and you'll be able to remember, oh, I didn't import that one, and take care of it. So it's not a huge glaring error. It's just something you'll get used to the more you practice. So in order to import a library in Python, you're going to want to use the import keyword, as simple as it gets, followed by a space and the name of the library that you want to import. So of course this course is focused on pandas, so let's begin with writing pandas. And by itself, if I just executed this cell with Shift plus Enter, it would import pandas. But there is a more common approach here. So in addition to the library itself, we have something called aliases. And an alias is basically an alternate name. Usually when you think of alias, you think of something like secret agents and code names. And that's sort of what it is. It's basically an alternate name that we can assign to a library. And usually the purpose of that is simply to reduce the total amount of characters that we have to type. Aliases are completely optional, and then their names are totally up to you, but there is a community standard for a lot of popular Python libraries, and the community standard for pandas is PD. So in order to assign the alias PD to the pandas library, you follow this statement with the as keyword and then the alias that you want to give it. So I'm going to write PD. All this basically means is instead of writing pandas each time we use something in that library, we're just going to write PD. 2 letters instead of 6, less typing, less room for error. Pretty simple. Now, in addition to pandas, there are going to be a couple other libraries that we utilize throughout this course, and one of them is called NumPy. That's short for Numerical Python, and it's actually the library on which pandas is built on top of. So NumPy by itself is kind of taken care of behind the scenes when we import pandas, but we may also want to use a lot of additional NumPy features such as random data generation throughout the course. NumPy is really great if you want to do something like generate an array of 1 million rows of data by 5 columns and so on. So once again, the syntax is going to be the exact same. It's going to be import NumPy, and then the most common community alias for NumPy is NP. So again, we won't need this library in every single lesson, but whenever we do, I'm just going to alert you to it and just give you the heads up. So just follow along with this code. And usually, in most development, programmers just put this import cell at the very top of the notebook, so all of the libraries are imported at once and are ready to go. So just keep an eye out for that. And finally, one additional library that we'll be using is matplotlib, which is actually a library for data visualization. So things like bar charts and line graphs and pie charts. So we're going to want to repeat the same process, the import keyword followed by the name of the library, which is matplotlib. But this time around, we're going to modify it a bit. Instead of importing the entire matplotlib library, we only want to import a specific module. And you can think of a module as like a subdirectory within the main library. It's sort of like a little section. We basically save ourselves memory by not importing all of matplotlib, but rather importing just the section that we need. And that directory, that module, is called pyplot. In order to reference that, you can just place a period after matplotlib and write pyplot. So we're basically just importing this section of the matplotlib library. And the pyplot module from the matplotlib library also has a very popular community alias, and that is PLT. Finally, there's one more line that we have to place here that's related to matplotlib. By default, whenever it renders a chart, and this is, by the way, this is hours ahead in the future when we get into the plotting part of the course, but I'm just showing you all these commands at the beginning to familiarize you with them. Whenever we start doing things like rendering graphs and charts, the default behavior is to do them outside the notebook. I think it's something like a terminal window that just pops up. We basically want to render all of our charts and graphs in line, basically within the Jupyter Notebook, so we can immediately see the output of our code. In order to do that, there's a thing called cell magic, which is basically a one-line or multi-line command that we can give to Jupyter Notebook, and it will take care of all that complex stuff behind the scenes. And the command to tell Matplotlib to make all of its graphs and charts in line or within the notebook is just going to be the %, followed by Matplotlib, no space there, and then a space and the word inline. So when you execute this, as long as there's a number that appears on the left, keep in mind that your number may be different because you may be executing these cells in a different order, but as long as that number appears and you don't have any kind of glaring warning message, then the process of importing is successfully completed and you are ready to get going. Keep in mind, for a library like Matplotlib, if you're launching it for the very first time, you may see a red warning message that says something like Matplotlib is building its cache or its font cache. That's totally fine. If you see a warning message that doesn't look critical, and usually that means it's just going to be a little box without any specific lines of code, if you see that and you want to make it go away, just try re-executing that cell, just pressing into it and pressing Shift-Enter again, and then if it disappears a second time, then you should be good. And basically, as soon as that number appears, you know that you've successfully imported our libraries. So for example, just as a very quick introduction, I know now that my pandas library is imported as PD. So what I can do here just to check and confirm is just use one of its methods or commands, one of its functionalities, if you will. So I can write PD, which is my alias, a dot, and then you can write __ version __. And predictably, this is just a thing to get pandas to tell us what version is currently installed. When I execute this, I'll get my current version, which is 0.19. Keep in mind, on your end, it may be a version that's a little bit greater, but as long as it shows you that, it basically means that pandas, the library, is communicating back to you. And if it's communicating back to you, well, then certainly it's been properly imported. So that's just a quick heads up on how we can import libraries and some of the ones that we'll be importing throughout the course. I'll give you notice whenever we're using specific ones in specific lessons, so you're reminded to import them. But that's just a quick introduction to how we load these specific libraries that we want to use into our Jupyter Notebook working environment.